Hi everyone, and welcome to the final Tadaima Fine Art Friday Artist Talk. These past couple months have been an exciting experience for me, and I've really enjoyed bringing you all these artists. While I am looking forward to getting some sleep, it's been great seeing old friends and making new ones. Before we get to our featured artists, I'd like to thank Ray Storazio, our engineer, without whom we couldn't have done the pilgrimage. Thanks also go out to Kimiko Mar, Hanako Wakatsuki, and Aaron Oyama, along with the rest of the Tadaima Planning Committee, our partner organizations, and to all of you, the participants of Tadaima on both sides of the computer. I first met Emily at the 2002 Manzanar pilgrimage. As we were talking, we discovered a common interest in photographing the camps. We stayed in touch after the pilgrimage, and in 2003, she asked me if I wanted to attend what would become the first annual Minidoka pilgrimage. Having known Emily for almost 20 years, I've had the opportunity to see her art transform from black and white documentary photography to video and mixed media with a strong personal element to it. I found her work to be at once lush yet stark, personal yet universal. So much of her work is rooted in her family histories, and then it expands to encompass universal visual cues that allow the viewer to find their own connections to the narrative. Emily Hanako Momohara was born in Seattle, Washington, where she grew up in a mixed-race family. Her work centers around issues of heritage, multiculturalism, immigration, and social justice. She has exhibited nationally, most notably at the Japanese American National Museum in a two-person show titled Sugar Islands. She has been a visiting artist at several residency programs, including the Center for Photography at Woodstock, Headlands Center for the Arts, Fine Arts Work Center, and Red Gate Gallery Beijing. In 2015, her work was included in the Chongqing Photography and Video Biennial. Emily has created socially driven billboards for Four Freedoms and United Photo Industries. She lives and works in Cincinnati, where she is Associate Professor of Art at the Art Academy of Cincinnati and heads the photography major. It's with great pleasure to introduce to you Emily Hanako Momohara.
Well, John, thank you so much for that lovely introduction. I also want to thank the entire Tadaima team. The amount of work that it's taken to put this long event on is absolutely tremendous, and all of your labors are greatly appreciated, so thank you. Before we get started, I'd like to acknowledge the land that I am on. I'm speaking to you from the Osage, Shawnee, Miami, Adena, and Hopewell Native Lands and Waters. What we now call Cincinnati is still a place of racial and economic inequity that is systematically preserved. I acknowledge that this living foundation is the physical and historical location of my art making. So let's talk a little bit about the work that's in the show. So in talking about my work, it's important to know a couple things. One, the video pieces in the exhibition are from 2005 and 2006 when I was in a graduate school at the University of Kansas. Originally, the thought of showing my student work on a stage like this was a little daunting, but I'm pleasantly surprised that the work holds up and I'm still proud of the content. However, the technical limitations of 2005 are definitely evident in the video quality. So the progress of visual technology is always so rapidly moving. This piece is called Sandstorm, and it's a creation from audio of an interview with my grandmother and a performance of sorts by myself. Did you ever get caught in the dust storm?
Yeah, one time. Walking down from the administration building and then walking back. Got sandstorm.
What do you do?
You gotta keep walking.
How do you breathe?
Well, you gotta, kind of cover your face. I remember walking. I don't know, it's just, that's all I remember, being in.
The sand is slowly overcoming me. I wanted to show the ways in which the incarceration was overwhelming, wholly impactful, and intergenerational. The music serves a couple of purposes. At times it obscures my grandmother's voice. This symbolizes this like unshared stories or painful stories that are hard for her to talk about. And it's also tying it to the time of the incarceration. We were in the midst of post 9/11 backlash against Arab Americans when I made the piece. And so this lullaby is an Arabic lullaby, also talking about generations of war. So combining those pieces together was really important for me to make the incarceration experience of Japanese Americans relevant to what was happening on the international stage, and arguably still happening on the international stage. Anecdotally, this was a really difficult shoot. I had originally rented a leaf blower to have a friend of mine blow the sand over me, and it was not sufficient. So she ended up on her hands and knees throwing sand at me as I was filming this from above a contraption that I had created above. But I really wanted to have that sense of archaeology, right, in the work, this message obscured, to talk about how I really felt like I was mining my family's history to figure out more about both my grandparents and myself. This is also a performance piece. Shown in the gallery, it was a 3-channel video, each showing a stage in the process. It's about healing and medicine and peacefulness. It references a Japanese tea ceremony as well as a Native American botanical remedy. Both Minidoka and the University of Kansas, where I was living, had strong ties to indigenous peoples. In fact, often I was asked when I lived in Lawrence, Kansas, what tribe I was from. So the land and its ancestral uses were kind of in the back of my mind. As some of you may know, sagebrush does not grow in Kansas, at least this kind of sagebrush. I had to bring it back from Idaho. I was at Hagerman, Idaho for a Friends of Minidoka board retreat. And I dug up this small plant, and it was quite a task. I had no idea that a small 10-inch little sagebrush bush could have a 20-inch root that would go deep into the ground. My cousin Lisa Joy and I went to Home Depot and bought some shovels, and we're out there trying to get this plant. It was the last day that I was there, of course, because I didn't want it to die if I had unburied it earlier. So then I gave it to my friend Janet Keegan, who lives in Twin Falls. And she went ahead and posted it so that it would go by mail to Lawrence. So you can make art out of anything, really. The next video that I'm going to show you is called In the Hills of Idaho. And it came to me when I was looking at old home video from my mother's side of the family.
Way beyond the hills of Idaho, Wyoming Canyon reached the sun, as it smiles upon the trees of Idaho to say another day is done.
This short clip of a deer caught on barbed wire is so shocking. When I first saw it, it really made his struggle and the fear evident. Thinking about barbed wire, obviously with Minidoka and my family's experience, I knew that I had to use this as part of my work, but it was really short, just a few seconds. My mom actually remembers when this video was made. She was a kid and my grandfather had the video camera and he put it down to free the fawn. So that's why the video is only a couple seconds long. But I wanted to use that and just kind of repeat that struggle to talk about our experiences at Minidoka in a very physical, visceral way. The audio then is from the bus at the 2004 Minidoka pilgrimage. And after visiting the camp, as you can imagine, everyone on the bus is coming back and they're talking about, stories, and younger folks are asking questions. And there was a man whom I don't know who started singing a song in the hills of Idaho, and that he remembered singing when he was working out in the fields when he was at Minidoka. And then, of course, after he finished, everyone applauded. And I felt like that audio was a perfect companion for that struggle, showing the struggle and the fear, but also the kind of resilience and the beauty that the Japanese Americans brought to this place. One time I was giving a talk and was showing this video and the audio didn't work. And it was in the middle and I had all these people in an auditorium looking at me. And so on the fly, I just decided to have the audience make the sound of the wind. So everybody started going, blowing, doing the wind. And I sang what I thought the words were for the song because you can't really make it out. And then afterwards, I started applauding and everyone applauded with me. And it actually created a whole nother aspect of the piece. And I almost wish I could do it that way every time now. The next video is another audio from my grandmother, and my grandfather is in there as well. It's often that my grandma would tell me there was no story to tell about Minidoka. Many of us have heard that from our family members. It's as if she thought that Minidoka was boring or mundane or, not worth talking about. And her self-denial or need to bury the past or the desire not to pass on those bad memories became part of my family's incarceration story. So let's watch this video.
Don't put that on. Why? It inspires me. There's nothing to say. Well, tell me, Grandma. No, there's too much to say. Oh, no. Oh, no. Nobody going to tell her. I know, but it's not it's nothing to say.
As the goldfish is flopping around, it reminds us that it's similar to koi, but a more pedestrian version. My grandmother says, oh, there's nothing to say. But then the struggle, much like the deer in the hills of Idaho, the struggle shows that emotion, that there really is a loss and a legacy of trauma there. Of course, that's interrupted by the static and the interference of maybe trying to convey that message to your loved ones. So it's that trauma that brought me to my most recent work. And if we have a few minutes, I just want to throw this in here because I think it's related and important for some of the programming that also happened this week about incarceration of folks at our borders. So in 2018, I was invited by Four Freedoms to do some billboards for their 50 state initiative. And originally, I was just going to do one in Cincinnati. And so, thinking about what I wanted to do, I knew that most people in the area probably had not learned about the incarceration in their schooling. And so, really wanting to highlight how never again is now, but also make it accessible. So I chose this Clem Albers image that's from National Archives of Yukiko, Okinawa. And she's 3 years old. And I mean, she's a child. You can see that she's sitting there with all of her bags. And that kind of image I felt could transcend whether or not you understood the race-based incarceration that Japanese Americans had undergone during World War II. And then I asked them if they had an artist for Idaho, if they were going to, if they had plans for an Idaho billboard, and they hadn't. And I said, well, I explained Minidoka was in Idaho, and I would really love to do a billboard in Idaho. So they said, yes, do it. And I was grateful. And I started thinking about, well, what do I want to do in Idaho? And, billboards feel like such an antiquated way to get the message out now, especially because, we have the internet and, there's all these other forms of communication. But I started to think about it just as a giant photograph that I could insert into the Idaho landscape. So I also from National Archives got this image of Irene and Hiroshi. They're two little children at Minidoka. You can see Minidoka Barracks in the background and that landscape of Minidoka. And I thought, I'm going to insert this incarceration site of Minidoka as it was back into the contemporary landscape of Idaho. So if you go to the next slide, you can actually see how that landscape starts to combine with what's going on right there in Idaho. So last, I want to show you about some old new work that I did in 2019. Actually, the show called D/Tension/Past just came down in February of this year. 21C Museum Hotels asked me if I would show some documentary work that I had originally done at the camps from like 1999 to actually as late as 2014 that were very traditional film documentary style images. And I was thinking about them, and some of that older work, I wasn't sure that I would shoot it the same way. The ways that I was looking at the camps was more about archaeology and more about finding out my family's story than being an art activist, right? So I thought, oh, is this still really how I would tell the story now? So I wrestled with it for a little bit and decided that I needed to re-photograph the photographs. So what I did was I went through some of the old negatives and then photographs that I had already printed, and I chose images that I felt spoke to the experience of those who were being incarcerated because of their immigration status and the color of their skin at our southern border. So I took those images. So you have the location, and then you have the negative of that location and the print that hypothetically I made in 2000 or so. And then I made a new print of that. So I had a new negative and a new print. So we had 5 generations there. That idea of generational loss. I'm a Yonsei, and of course, we do have Gosei in the Japanese American community now. So, this idea of being able to embed the community and the meaning into the process of how I was making the work was really important to me. So on these images, you can actually see the double border of the print. If you are a photo geek like me and John, I know, you can see that I'm using a Hasselblad because you can see that square format and little notches around the edge. But you'll see that there's actually a double bar now because I'm shooting twice, right? There's 2 negatives. And I'm reproducing then these prints to kind of show that removal from the time that Japanese Americans were incarcerated to now when Latinx folks are being incarcerated, from the generations that are actually experiencing incarcerations to the legacy of that, which is going to happen in the future. So I really wanted that to be evident in the process, and a remnant of that in the piece. These 2 pieces, the one on the left is from Manzanar. It's some wire that's bundled up. The one on the right is from the Panama Tea House in Seattle, from the artifacts that are in the basement there that were left after camp. I really felt drawn to that magazine. It says physical culture. There is this white woman kind of leaping up in joy. And I thought, wow, why did someone pack that, as something that they needed to save? But then evidently they never did come back for it in the end. So this idea of culture and legacy, maybe what we absorb from mainstream white culture, what we reject, all of these different things kind of wrapped up in that act of leaving this magazine. The last thing that I'm going to share with you is the text that was written about the exhibition Detention Past. The curator, Amethyst Beaver, did an amazing job. One of the things that I was pretty adamant about was that, again, this work couldn't just be about World War II. It needed to be actively engaged in our contemporary politics. So we had the text translated. You see it in English, you see it in Japanese, and you see it in Spanish. And I just want to read from you an excerpt of that text because she talks about it so much more eloquently than I do. In 1976, President Gerald Ford formally repealed the executive order and apologized for the past actions. Quote, I call upon the American people to affirm with me this American promise that we have learned from the tragedy of that long ago experience, forever to treasure liberty and justice for each individual American, and resolve that this kind of action shall never again be repeated, end quote. She goes on to write about my process of photographing the camps. She says, Momohara traveled to several of the former sites of incarceration, photographing the visual remains of wartime imprisonment infrastructure, concrete steps, barbed wire fences, barrack-style cots, disintegrated wood posts, and the desolate, exposed desert landscapes where people were subjected to extreme heat and cold. Reviewing these photographs in light of the present moment, Momohara rephotographed her original images, reframing and reflecting on the parallels between the wartime incarceration of Japanese Americans and the incarceration of migrants and the separation of families at the US-Mexico border. Quote, this is only relevant if we do something with it, the artist explains. If we don't, then it's in the past. It's only relevant if we can look at it and see that these mistakes were made before and we don't need to make them again. As the rally cry of never again is now, and the apologies of presidents past are forgotten in moments of fear and perceived vulnerability, these photographs serve as potential visual reminders, warnings not to repeat the mistakes of the past.
Wow, that was great. I Oh, actually worked this time. So Emily, it's I wanted to put you last, partly because, as I mentioned in my intro, I've known you longer than any of the other artists here. Um, Now, for those of you who don't know, I had mentioned that I thought it was 2002. It could have been 2003, or I thought it was 2002 at Manzanar. Emily says, "Oh no, it felt a lot longer than that." So, no, but we've known each other almost 20 years, and it's been, to me, fascinating to watch. Now this almost your artistic, the cycle, because you started off as this documentary, very matter of fact, and very the archaeological type of stuff that you did, which was very similar to mine. And I remember when you had sent me a DVD of your work after we had met, and I was looking at it on my computer, and my mom was looking at the photo. She goes, "Oh, John, did you shoot new photos?" And it was remarkable how in many of our photographs we had a very, very similar style, which for me was a little unnerving, because we came from such drastically different areas. And I'd wondered, am I letting the camera kind of guide me or creating these things? Because Teresa's stuff some of the stuff had a similar kind of quality to it. But so we've had, oh gosh, I mean, I used to be a photo professor. You are a photo professor. We've crossed paths many times through all these years. In fact, the last time we saw each other in person was the Four Freedoms Congress at Janum in the end of February. So just at the start of this whole coronavirus thing, we got to see each other again, and to feature your billboards as far as hanging up on the side of the museum was really exciting for me. So when you've been, as long as I've known you, you have been an activist. Like you mentioned, your photography back when you first did the camp stuff wasn't overtly activist, but you've been, what got you involved in your activism?
Wow. I'm not sure if I can pinpoint it. I can say that my parents probably had a lot to do with it. My mom was a social worker, and my father was involved in politics. So I kind of grew up with the mentality of service and giving back. Of course, when I was, much younger, I was really interested in serving myself, so I didn't do as much volunteerism. It probably was, in my mid-20s when I started becoming active again, or active in a permanent way. But I'm not really sure. I mean, I guess that 9/11 was probably a pretty profound moment for me. I had just been involved with the JCL briefly, but I wanted, again, never again is now, right? I really understood some of the struggles that Arab Americans were going through at that time. And I imagined them experiencing things like my grandparents and great grandparents did. And I just, I wanted to get involved. So I think that's when I started really actively going to, meetings multiple times a week. And I was on the Civil Rights Committee, and that's when I met May Namba. That's when I started going to the Busch Garden in the Seattle International District for those Seattleites there, where all the local folks hung out. So it probably wasn't until my 20s, but I'm not sure that I remember a specific moment when I said, "Oh, I'm gonna, do this."
Okay, so in your activism, so as long, I knew you, and really from the beginning of the activism, really was with the Minidoka, with the Friends of Minidoka, the pilgrimage. What made you start getting involved there? What was that? Was it about your grandmother? Was it just about the fact that you may not have known all that much about it? You want to learn. Well, how did you get started there?
Well, I had already been photographing the various camps for a couple of years before the Friends of Minidoka got together. Friends of Minidoka was created after Bill Clinton designated Minidoka as a National Historic Site. And then the National Park Service took hold of the land, the small footprint of land that was there at the time. It's since grown. If you haven't been to Minidoka, you should go and check it out. There's a new visitor center. Safely, when it's safe to go do that. But at the time, Neil King, who was the superintendent, he was really rightfully leery to be going into a community of color like the Japanese American community, who had reason to be skeptical of government and asking for their help for this national park site. And so he had approached some folks to be part of forming a group, a friends group. And so that's how I got involved. It's just a handful of us at first. And then the pilgrimage that you went to in 2003 was kind of a collision of the Friends of Minidoka and the Northwest region Japanese American Citizens League having their regional meetings in Twin Falls, Idaho. So it was like, oh, well, we should have a pilgrimage. There's all these folks going to be there. And then it, of course, turned into something much bigger and much more amazing that the pilgrimage committee now does a fantastic job. So.
Yeah, they do. It's really, it's my favorite, even though I have no connection to Minidoka. It really is my favorite to go. I just think the education, the education to get, the being able to talk, the programming in non-programming time, I think is genius. Is being able to get people to talk, to create a community. The pilgrimage that they had, where they actually had the soft opening of the visitor center, I was talking to Hanako, and I said that pilgrimages have become kind of like these pop-up Nihon machis. Mm-hmm. This community gets created, it's there, and then it kind of just pops up every year, and I think that Minidoka has done a really good job of doing that. And so, yeah, to the people that took over, to the committee, they've done a great job. So I want to get to your artwork a little bit. Now, when you and the part we had talked about when I talked to Emily about doing this, and she asked, well, which ones do you want me to do? And I really wanted her ones on that she did had her thesis show, because partly because I liked the fact that they didn't have the typical Japanese American physical representation in the work. It was their personal elements. There were elements that were the hidden elements, like the dust in the camp, which could be the dust of the camp, or it could be bearing of secrets, or a lot of other things too. But it was much more suggestive. It wasn't as obvious. And I thought that, as she mentioned in her intro, that it held up. It's still something that you look at it, and you don't really know what you're looking at if you just look at it for its superficial value. But when you start looking at it and you start thinking in terms of, okay, learning a little bit about her history or examining your own history, you can start seeing those elements that apply to, I think, universally to a lot of Japanese American experiences, to us, those of us who are Sansei, or those of us who are descendants of people that survived the camps. And so what was that? Why did you decide to go that route when in grad school, to take that direction?
Well, I think that other work that I had done in undergrad had been much more conceptual, symbolic, and metaphorical of experiences. I went to the University of Washington, which is a heavy on the art school, and I studied under Roger Shimomura, who of course is a fantastic performance painter, printmaker, artist. And I really started examining why I wanted to make the work about the incarceration. Like I am clearly several generations removed. You know, why is this the vehicle that I'm using to talk about social justice issues? Why is it the vehicle I'm using to think about mixed race identity? And I felt like the Japanese American incarceration was this pivotal moment in our community, which completely shifted absolutely everything and how we think about ourselves as citizens, and lends itself to a different history than maybe some of our other partner or parallel communities. And it has been told, the story has been told in so many ways already, right? And so, you know, that piece of advice, the personal is the universal, right? So, you know, me just really investigating it and thinking about the stories that my grandmother allowed me to record, sort of stories, you know, whether or not she's saying there's no story, or just that idea of, well, that's the experience, you know, and how do we show that? What does the struggle feel like? Is it like a fish out of water, you know, like thinking about it in a more poetic way. I mean, the work is pretty aggressive. It kind of hits you in the face because it's violent in a way, but it's not linear in a sense that it doesn't tell a story like A, B, C, D, E, right? So it makes you kind of engage and think and like massage it a little bit before you can ingest all those pieces.
Yeah, it was interesting that the order that you did the videos today. I thought it was interesting because you know, when I saw the work, at your thesis show, we walk into the big room and the 4 sets of videos are playing, and I don't really remember the order which I saw them being played, but watching them being played in the order here, where you pick the sand being buried, then you have the tea, and then you have the deer and the goldfish, and I thought. I think when first time I saw it, when we were recording this, I thought that was kind of, it was a surprise to me, because in my mind I remember them being the deer, the goldfish, the sand, and the tea, and I saw it as almost being the 2 were the struggles, the bearing was, and so that was the people in the camps, and then, you know, resettlement, the whole episode, you know, so even before camps, the struggles that they went through, then the camps, then the resettlement, and then there was that quiet talk, the peace, where they don't really, even though it wasn't really peace, but where they wouldn't talk about it, they didn't have to struggle physically with everything went on, and then I mean, I'm sorry, the bearing was bearing all that stuff, and then the tea was, you know, that in a sense how we've now come into it. And so
healing.
Yeah, exactly. And that healing is actually in a sense, for some of them, is for us to learn the stories now, because for many people, they didn't know the stories of camp. And so when it was brought up to them, there was this trauma, there was that struggle. And now that the conversations have risen, that they could see the commonality, they could see where they can have a shared grief, shared struggle, where the healing occurs. And so I thought it was really interesting that I had never, and I don't know, did you plan to show them in that order that you showed them?
No, I mean, because I made them to be seen in a gallery, and you can't really, you know, direct people, watch this, then watch that, then, you know, walk over here. So I don't think they were made in with an idea of which ones would be seen first. But I guess when I was putting together the talk for tonight, I was thinking about the ways in which I was going to talk about the work. And so that performative element was kind of the first thing that I talked about. So I put those 2 that actually had my body physically, because I was thinking about talking about why and how I make things. So maybe, I mean, that's the only reason that I put them in that order. But when you talk about the healing, one thing it made me remember, so for my art history degree, I had written this, I have a BA in art history, and I had written this paper, and it was accepted in a colloquium. I was really nervous, and I was researching and writing, and it was about Roger Shimomura's work. And this was before I knew I would go on to study with him. So I went down to the Greg Casera Gallery, and I explained I was a student, and I said, do you have anything I can look at? And they took me in the back, and they pulled out these paintings for me. And I remember thinking about how brave the work was, how bold it was, how it just called out the injustices and the personal elements, like, showing a child dealing with these things, or, showing really intimate moments in a family. And I remember when I left, I just cried because it seemed so emotional and inappropriate to show publicly, and yet here they were, these giant paintings, and I just, that was a moment for me where I realized it was okay to talk about suffering and anger, and, some of all those ideas that you're taught, you don't really share that publicly, right? But that it was okay to put that into the work.
Yeah. Yeah, I was wondering, because I noticed that you didn't mention Roger in your bio.
Oh.
And I thought, oh, do I want to bring that up or not? Does she want to, and because I was just very envious when you got into Kansas, and it's like, oh, you get to work with Roger. That's cool. I mean, because I've always thought that I've loved the fact that his work, and especially his printmaking, because yes, it does bring up the Japanese woodblock prints and the quality, but it has this very a graphic novel quality, a very cartoon, very, and the colors, the hues are bright, happy colors, and he has this dark, this dark layer underneath it, and so it's almost, you're drawn in by the visual, and then you're hit across, upside the head with the content.
John, my paper was called "The Layers of Shimomura," so.
Oh, okay.
Although I do not have a copy of that anymore, thank goodness, because I'm sure it was horrible.
So you never showed that to Roger, huh?
I don't think I did. He probably would be horrified and burned.
Yeah. So we got a question here that would be good right now. So from Ryan Kozu. Hi, Emily. Do you have any current or upcoming works that relate to the incarceration?
Yes, well, I am, and I think Ryan obviously knows about this project. I'm working on a film about May Namba, who I mentioned that I had met when I started getting involved with the Japanese American Citizens League Seattle chapter. Right now, it's a little bit on hold. I did do some shooting this summer. Even during COVID, I actually went out to Seattle, and I drove so that I could socially distance at every moment that I was on my way. But the timeline of the actual film, what was supposed to happen is that we were going to go to the Washington, D.C. protests against the incarceration at the U.S.-Mexico border with Sudo for Solidarity, and I was going to film Mia Namba, who's the narrator of the film there. And of course, that didn't happen. So I'm searching for an ending to the film right now. That's kind of where it's at. I haven't worked on it for about 3 weeks because school's starting, and we are teaching in person and online together, and trying to navigate teaching studio arts on the internet is a challenge. So I've been kind of working on the teaching aspect of my practice recently, but hopefully lightning will strike and I will come up with something really ingenious to replace that ending.
Well, thanks, Ryan, for asking that, because I actually had asked Emily earlier if I could bring it up, and she said no.
It's not ready yet, and I'm so and you know what? There are people who have COVID has wreaked havoc on their lives with their housing and their finances and all that. I have really no room to be complaining that, but COVID has really changed the way that this film is being made. So
I imagine it just, but well, I guess it's on your website, so I can mention it. If you want to know more about this project, she does have it on her website. So
it's just a little paragraph.
little paragraph
page that talks about May and how amazing she was, and how you can be a participant and a major player without being the kind of loud person that goes marching with a bullhorn and all of that, that there are ways to be an activist that are really meaningful, like if you're a quiet giant.
That's what amazed me when I remember, because she was, the first, because I didn't really know anybody there. I met your dad for the first two pilgrimages, and so May was one of the people that I met, and she stood out because, yeah, she was quiet, but boy, talk about internal fortitude. She was strong, and it's weird because I was not used to a lot of elderly Nisei women that wouldn't hold back when asked. Yeah.
Yeah, she was quiet unless something needed to be said. Like she was the person that jumped in there to fill all of the, the spaces that needed to happen. Otherwise, she was totally happy to let a younger generation take over. She was, not one of those folks that, as they get older, they say, oh, those young people, whatever. She would always be hanging out with the young people, So I remember that first year of the pilgrimage, she and I talked every day because we planned the whole thing in just a couple months. And she was 81 at the time, and I must have been like 28 or something, 28 or 29. And then after the pilgrimage, she called me up and was like, I just miss talking to you. We had to continue being BFFs. So
yeah, I remember because it was one of our, just where we had like the group discussions, and we were in I forget the room. It was like a big room, and we were all kind of sitting down, and she was at my table. I guess you were there too, but, and she just started talking and asking me about, about, why I was there, and then but she didn't really volunteer anything about herself. And then I'm like, why are you? What's, and then she was very excited and talked, and it was just really exciting to I think I hear of a lot of people, and so many of my friends and a lot of relatives on my mom's side, where they didn't get stories of camp. They didn't get people that, if they did hear stories, they didn't hear the stories of the people that really wanted the young people to know about it, and to get them involved, and not just in the history of the camp, but in the social aspect, the social justice aspect of why we should know about it. And that's what floored me about her.
Yeah, and I think, for folks who are listening who maybe aren't as familiar with the Japanese American incarceration, it was very shameful for the folks that were incarcerated. They, felt as if they had committed a crime, even though they hadn't committed a crime. And so because of that, a lot of those stories weren't shared. And so that history, it was just too painful for them to bring up, even though as a community collectively, everyone understands that the stories need to be told. It's just not everyone can do that work. And we need, those brave souls that will share those things.
Yeah. Yeah, I remember. That's why, like, for instance, a lot of times when we talk about the incarceration, we'll mention incarceration or concentration camps, or when I say the incarcerees, and some people even say the inmates. And I just can't do that, because that seems to me, in my mind, implies a guilty of a crime. It's not, because there are a lot of innocent inmates. But it's just, in our culture, it's been such a negative thing. And yeah, that guilt, it was a misplaced guilt. The guilt should have been on the people putting them in the camps, not the people put into it. And they never grew out of it. They never could come to grips. A lot of people could not come to grips with that.
I think that's part of why it's so important that we need jail reform now, that we can't be incarcerating people just while they're waiting for their immigration court dates, because we are leaving scars and trauma that are going to stay with these families for generations. We don't know how long. Those children that are now spending all this time in those massive yards, with chain link fence. I mean, what is that child going to grow up with mentally left over from those experiences? And we just have to we have to do something. And I think the Japanese American experience is such a parallel experience, race-based. It's the kind of the otherness, right, of the communities, men, women, children, other, everyone. And so I feel like we really have a platform that we can say, hey, we've been here before. Congress said that this was unconstitutional. Let's think about what we're doing and why we're doing it, and why are we afraid? Why do we feel so vulnerable?
Yeah. I mean, what's happening? Are you getting a double sound from me?
No.
Okay, I'm getting a weird audio here. Okay, I totally lost my train of thought now. Oh, well, I'll go to a question. So, Clement Hami, great work on me. Emily, do you have a favorite performance, artist, or work that inspired you? And also, he has a second one. We'll go to that. Roger also had a lot of performance works too. Perhaps Roger was an inspiration?
I mean, yes, Roger was an inspiration. He always tried me to actually do performance work. Not filming myself, but actually doing the performances, and I refused, and I still kind of refuse to do that kind of work because I'm too much of a nervous control person when it comes to those things, and I know that with my lens on my camera or video camera, I can make it exactly the way that I want it, but I do really. I feel like using one's body as a medium is a very impactful way to work. I think one of my favorite artists that work this way, and this person also is a photographer / sculptor / videographer, would be Ana Mendieta. She did a lot of video work. She was a Cuban American and was really interested in landscape. Maybe that's better. And her body with that landscape and her heritage and such. I'm trying to think of some other performance artists. I mean, I guess I would say Ana Mendieta and Roger probably for that.
Okay. So Ryan wants to know what was like working with the great Roger Shimomura. And Roger's gonna hate that great
thing. Yeah, I love it. It was great. I mean, I would totally go back and do it again. There were tears, but there were also, great moments. I love his way of working with me it's always kind of gruff, but I know that we're still very close. I actually just did an interview with him for the Spencer Art Museum. Hopefully that will be coming out soon. It's an educational video because he has a retrospective of his performance work at the Spencer Art Museum. And they asked me to do a series of videos, and one of them I interviewed him about the work. I don't know when that's coming out though, but we still talk a lot. He's like an uncle to me. I remember when he was selling his van. He sells his van every time it gets close to 100,000 miles and buys a new one. And he was trying to get me to buy it. And I was like, Roger, I was a student at the time. I was like, I have no money. I'm a student. And he's like, well, pay me back when you graduate. I was like, well, assuming I get a job. Thankfully I did, but at the time I didn't know I would. And he said, okay, I'll sell it to you for $1 now and you pay me back when you can. And I said, well, what if you die first? And he said, as long as you don't run me over, you can have the van. So that's the kind of, he's just like an uncle to me. Like we joke around, and I try to see him when I come through, go through the Midwest, and he's been a wonderful influence and mentor.
I remember that van.
Mhm.
That was so, yeah, it was, in fact, it had just been broken into when I visited you at Art Academy. Glass covering the back of the. Okay, so Ken Mochizuki asks, why is that for some Nikkei, the camp experience becomes core to their lives and work, and for other Nikkei, they could care less? Whew.
Boy, I don't know. I don't know. I think that, there's something about how individuals deal with trauma. And, some folks deal better by pushing it away, or they have different kinds of mourning and then accepting processes. I'm sorry, Ken, I can't answer that one. I don't know. I mean, I know that it's I think some of it, at least for the future generations, like myself as a Yonsei, which means fourth generation, and Japanese Americans actually count their generations different than all Asian Americans. Most other folks count first generation as the firstborn in the U.S., and our immigrant generation is the first generation for us. So, and anyway, so I'm Yonsei, I'm fourth generation. And I've noticed that there's a lot of folks in my generation who, especially as young people, rejected just everything Japanese. I think that, sometimes you internalize, when I was growing up, at least, Japan was a quite hated country. They were taking jobs away from the auto industry, and I grew up in the 80s, so I was born in the 70s, grew up in the 80s, so the Vincent Chin murder and all of that was kind of what was going on when I was growing up. So I think that you internalize some of that as a young person, whether or not you want to or not. I'm assuming that those Nisei and Sansei also, many of the Sansei were children in the camp. So I just assume that those experiences, you internalize some of that. And so how you deal with that is that, do you reject your Japaneseness, or do you try to, make people accept it? Like, I think it just depends on your personality. But I also know that as I grew older, I came into myself a little bit more, being able to be mixed, to understand that maybe at another time in my life, I may gravitate more to one side of my heritage than the other. And all of that is fine, right? All of it is just who I am, and I don't have to be a certain way. But that was a long process to get to that point, and I'm sure it'll change more later.
So echoes back. That leads me, I think, to this idea of identity. Is, did you feel that being Okinawan rather than mainland Japanese affected any of your the way you thought about the camps, or you thought about the community itself?
Well, so on my dad's side, we have, my grandfather was Okinawan and my grandmother was Japanese.
Mm-hmm.
So the Okinawan side was in Hawaii, so they were not incarcerated.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, my grandfather, who was born in Hanapepe, volunteered for the military. And in fact, if he hadn't done that, he probably wouldn't have met my grandmother. They met at a JCL dance for the soldiers, So that side of the family just wasn't incarcerated. So I felt like the incarceration was still really important. I also grew up in Seattle with my grandmother and all of that extended family, where the Hawaii family was in Hawaii. So I think that legacy of incarceration was more at the forefront than the Hawaiian experience was.
Okay. Okay. So, we ran out of time. Okay. Yeah. Okay. I got made fun of today because we've been running long, and if you know my dad, he tends to talk forever. So, I'm supposed to stop approximately on time. So, it is 7:00. Um, so, Emily, I'm glad we can do this.
Thank you for having me, inviting me.
It's
Yeah.
fun. And it's funny because I'm trying to come up with questions because we've talked so much and so long. It was like, I don't know what to ask. But I did learn more stuff about you, and I think that it's just been really, it's been fun catching up every so often, catching up with you again. And I just hope that, we have the ability or sometime that we can, finally see each other again in person. Because really, the last time we saw was like the last time we could do anything in person, because it was the end of February, beginning of March. So
at For Freedoms Congress, and if anyone's interested in social justice art, you should check out forfreedoms.org. It's an amazing organization, and that's where I saw John last. They had a congress where people from all 50 states were in, and territories actually also were invited to come, and workshops and artist activations and communally talk. And if that's what you're interested in, you should definitely check them out. But that happened the last weekend of February, so we really were hitting the limit there on being able to travel.
Well, I see her, she gives me a hug, and then she goes, John, I'm sick.
Well, I didn't have COVID though. I had a runny nose.
Typical.
I had a runny nose.
Okay, well, so thank you very much, and for everybody, all the Tadaima, my intro, I mentioned that the participants in Tadaima. Tadaima is a virtual community pilgrimage, and the one great thing about pilgrimages is everybody's a participant. Doesn't matter if you're an organizer or you're a speaker or you're a presenter or you're the person that goes to a pilgrimage for whatever region you go. Everybody is a participant. And so for our viewers who've been logging through all my stuff I've been doing every week, I thank you. This has really been way outside my comfort zone. So it was worth it to be able to talk to these and to introduce to many of you these amazing artists all this time. And so once again, thank you very much. And so tomorrow we have some more programming. So definitely hit that. And then on Sunday, we have what has been promised to be an amazing closing ceremonies. So, from what I hear, there will be periodic Tadaima stuff. So, definitely check at the JAMP website to see what might be coming up in the future. Okay. So once again, Emily, thanks very much. And I'll see you later. Okay.
All right.
Okay. Bye-bye.